Hello and welcome to the P4 Advanced Financial Management course. Before we go through and get started and get involved in any of the detail that's covered throughout the course, let's just go through first of all and have a little brief introduction to what is actually contained within the syllabus. This little introduction is just going to go through and cover four things. First of all, we're going to go through and look at the assumed knowledge that we should have that's been brought forward from previous papers that you will have sat, so predominantly F9, your financial management paper. We'll then go through and cover what we see within the actual syllabus itself, so specifically there for P4, looking at your advanced financial management. Once we've gone through and covered the syllabus, we'll then go through and have a look at what's contained within the exam. And then more importantly, something that you will really want to listen to is how to go through and pass this P4 exam paper. I'm sure you're all aware, you've heard the rumours on the grapevine, that it's possibly one of the hardest level papers that we have in the ACCA syllabus. However, as hard as it may be, it is perfectly passable as an exam. So, first of all, let's go through and have a look at what we have there in terms of our assumed knowledge. Now, as I said, this is going to be vitally important to help you get through any P4 exam. The reason why is, although there are new areas that get examined within the P4 paper, a lot of what gets examined is stuff that you will have seen before. So all the basics, all the techniques still go through and hold. However, all that happens is they just get examined, if you like, in a more advanced fashion. So there may be some more complex scenarios that you have to go through and deal with. However, it doesn't matter how complex that scenario may be, you can go through and look at the basics. We'll focus on the basics right the way throughout this course. So, some of the, if you like, basics or assumed knowledge that we have is going through there and looking at your investment appraisal. Remember, that was a huge part of your F9 syllabus. So there, when we're looking at our investment appraisal techniques, things that you need to be happy with there will be your net present value, your discounting techniques. We'll also go through there and see your IRR, so your internal rate of return. Other cash flow techniques, we'll be looking there at your payback period. And then finally, we'll go through there and look at your accounting rate of return. So if you like, not so much focusing upon cash flows, but looking there more in terms of investment appraisal, focus upon profit maximisation. You need to be comfortable with all of those areas of the syllabus from F9. We'll go through and recap them as they are that important. Second area of assumed knowledge is there looking at your sources of finance. Now, this is an area whereby we tend not to see so many numbers that we see there at P4, but a lot of P4 is about offering advice. So whereby we may have identified a project that we are going to go through and invest within, we then need to go through and offer advice as to which is the most beneficial or most appropriate source of finance. Now, sources of finance that we've gone through and seen before, we'll be looking there at your equity finance. We'll also be there looking at your debt finance. So predominantly thinking there about debentures and bank loans. And then what we'll also have as well will be your preference shares. And then any other forms of finance. Again, not so numerical, however, a very discursive part of the syllabus. What we'll also have as well is then your weighted average cost of capital. Remember, that is all there about looking at a suitable discount rate, an appropriate percentage to go through there and use within your project appraisal. Again, it's a numerical aspect that you saw within F9, your financial management paper. We will go through, recap your weighted average cost of capital, how to calculate that discount rate, look at the assumptions that we make in terms of calculating that weighted average cost of capital. And then what we'll then go through and do is start looking at more advanced discount rates that we may need to calculate. I'm not going to go through and talk about it too much. I think it's too early in the day there, but you need to be really comfortable with the basic calculation of a weighted average cost of capital. Fourth area of the syllabus there is looking at your working capital. That part of the F9 syllabus, again, was there, if memory serves me right, somewhere around 20-25% of the syllabus, which is looking there at your receivables, looking there at your payables, and looking there at your inventory. Again, we saw various models in terms of looking at how to go through and calculate debtor days, or for being technically correct, receivable days, payable days, and inventory days. However, we tend to have seen that quite a bit, not just there within F9, but also there within F2. We tend not to see so much there in terms of calculation of your inventory days, receivable days, and payable days. Again, it's more there about offering advice. How can we go through and reduce the level of receivables in our business to help us generate some additional cash? If we can generate additional cash, we can then use that cash to maybe go through there and make some investments and help generate some shareholder wealth. Again, working capital, an important part of assumed knowledge brought forward from F9. Next area that is just equally as important, again, it's a good area to be comfortable with, primarily because it doesn't involve any computational aspects. It's looking there at your gearing theories. Do you remember what your gearing theories were all about? If I say those words, Modigliani and Miller, and Modigliani and Miller's theory on gearing, and how if we change the level of gearing within our business, how that will then change the value of our business. Sound familiar? If not, it should be. You really need to go through there and start recapping on Modigliani and Miller's theories without tax, Modigliani and Miller's theories with tax, and then looking at it not from a theoretical perspective, but from a traditional aspect. If you like, what happens within the real world. It's a good discursive element to make sure that you are happy with going in to the P4 paper. Next bit is looking there at your ratios. Ratios, straight away, yes, it's looking at numbers. However, you're not just going to have to calculate the basic ratios that you've seen within your financial management paper. What you will see is a lot more of a linkage from the different parts of previous exams that you've sat. So, in previous exams, we've had to calculate your earnings per share. We've had to calculate a PE ratio. We've had to go through and calculate a gearing ratio based upon your levels of debt at market value compared to the value of equity at market value. We're not, as I said, going to just have to calculate these from a set of financial statements and given information. What's likely to go through and happen is we're going to have to link a ratios calculation in to a bit of advice from our sources of finance. So you might have to go through and recommend a source of finance, whether that be equity or whether that be some form of debt, and based upon whether we issue shares or whether we take out a loan, how that will then go through and impact your earnings per share. Will it increase or decrease your earnings per share? What will go through there and happen to your price-earnings ratio? What will also go through and happen to the level of gearing? Will it increase? Fine. And what we need to start looking at there is how much of an increase can this company accept. That's what we'll tend to see when it crops up more within P4 from what we've seen within F9. Final area of the syllabus there. I think you found it the most difficult aspect of the F9 syllabus is looking there at managing your financial risk. The financial risk that we were looking at there was your foreign currency risk. That was the area that we really focused upon within the F9 syllabus. You know, we touched very briefly upon interest rate risk, but we didn't really get involved in any numbers. We will see the numbers in advanced financial management and P4. We will have to go through and recap the numbers that we saw there within managing our foreign currency risk. Again, I'm not going to go through into it in too much detail, but things that you need to make sure that you're comfortable with in terms of your foreign exchange risk are looking there at your transaction risk, your translation risk, and then there, your economic risk. I'm not going to go through now and give you definitions of your transaction, your translation and economic risk. They should be there familiar. It's assumed knowledge. You should know it already. If you don't, go back and make sure that you have a quick look over some of your F9 stuff before you start getting stuck in to the majority of the P4 stuff. A lot of what we've seen here, what we've just mentioned, will be recapped briefly as we go through the syllabus, but there will be also focus then what we see within the P4 syllabus. The syllabus is split there into 7 parts. Okay. Now I don't want to go through and get involved too much in the syllabus and what's covered in there. But what I'll do is I'll emphasise, if you like, the more technically difficult areas, the ones whereby there's a high numerical content, possibly the areas where you spend a little bit more time in terms of revision, but that doesn't mean to say you can go through and neglect everything else. So what you've got there, first one, is the role and responsibility towards your stakeholders. So again, this takes a lot of your F9 knowledge that you've brought forward and then just applies it to more complex scenarios. Starts bringing in other aspects in terms of your sustainability and your economic risk. It goes through there and starts thinking about, again, your ethical issues. So what you need to think about there is a lot of things brought forward from P1. Ethics isn't something that can be taught. Ethics is something there that you have to go through and develop an understanding of and then apply it to a given scenario, a lot of which you've gone through and seen there in P1. So part A of the syllabus isn't actually anything difficult. There is nothing in there that is numerical or tough. Let's go through and have a look at the syllabus. We're not going to go through and look at it in any consummate detail. I just want to give you a brief overview in terms of what we're going to cover in each area, and then what, if you like, is going to be technical with respect to the numbers, what's going to be there, just knowledge and written aspects within the exam. So what you've got there is part A, the role and responsibility towards your stakeholders. So very much building upon what you've seen in F9 and looking at your stakeholder conflicts. So conflicts there between the shareholders and, say, your employees. Conflicts there between, say, your customers and maybe your suppliers. Okay, so you need to go through and have a look there at those conflicts you've seen previously. We'll recap them in the section A. We'll also go through and see things there, starting to look at corporate governance, so stuff that you've seen from P1. We'll also start bringing in ethics, again, stuff that you've seen there in P1, so vitally important. And we'll also start bringing in a little bit of sustainability and environmental risk. So we're trying to expand our business, but we need to balance that up with our stakeholders being environmental groups, and thinking about the world and the economy as it operates. In terms of part B, that's looking there at the economic environment for your multinationals. So that's going through there and looking at how you manage your international trade and finance. So if you like, going through, and we've got multinational companies and they are expanding, they are getting larger and larger and larger. So we look there at how do we go through and expand? Do we just export to a country? Do we go through and set up a joint venture? Do we go through there and actually set up as a permanent subsidiary? We'll start looking at how and what are the benefits of doing that. And also within there, we'll start to think, going back and start to looking at the major organisations that there are that promote free trade and try and minimise protectionism. So we'll start looking there at the World Trade Organisation and what it does. Part C is advanced investment appraisal, if you like, the first bit of the syllabus where we get involved in the numbers. Part A and B, purely knowledge, purely factual. You need to be able to apply that knowledge to the exam and the scenario that you're given. Part C, you'll spend much more time upon it based upon the computational aspects. So yes, you'll see all your F9 knowledge brought forward, but we'll look at more advanced things there, such as going through and looking at adjusted present values. We'll go through, revisit Monte Carlo simulation and look there at how that level of risk can then be incorporated and measured within a project, maybe using there such techniques as value at risk. We'll also go through there and start looking at not just the Monte Carlo simulation, but we start looking at the world of options. In F9 you've seen real options. here will recap what real options are, but then you'll have to try and value those real options. So we get into much more technical computational detail. But it doesn't matter how much detail and how technical it gets. At the end of the day, you can still pass this exam based on your F9 knowledge. So keep practicing and getting good at all the F9. Other one is looking there at your acquisitions and mergers. Again, you've seen acquisition and mergers there from F9. Here, it just takes it and looks at it in more complex scenarios. So the information that you are given is more difficult to digest. We don't do anything more than what we've previously done. You know, extra bits that we do look at, it's not significant in terms of the grand scheme of things, but we start looking at valuing intellectual capital. So how can we go through and value things such as your human resources, your staff that you have there within the business, thinking along the lines of intangibles. We'll also go through and be a little bit more specific in terms of the valuation technique and the type of acquisition that we look at. So will it be there an acquisition that doesn't change the level of business or finance risk? Maybe an acquisition that changes either the business risk or the financial risk, or an acquisition that goes through and changes both. So it's just using there an application of your brought forward knowledge. Part E is, again, stuff that you've seen very briefly, looking at your corporate restructuring and reorganisation. You know, if companies are struggling, how can that company go through and try and get itself back to become, if you like, profitable and less reliant on the debt that it has built up there within the business? You know, those previous two parts, advanced investment appraisal, acquisition and mergers, as we said, very computational. Part E is getting back into the chatty, discursive aspect, so something that will hopefully be there to your liking. You know, we start to talk about management buyouts, sell-offs, various different forms of divestment. Then you've got F. Again, part F is up there with advanced investment appraisal and acquisitions and mergers. That's all there about managing your risk. So when we're looking at risk there, we're looking predominantly at interest rate risk and foreign exchange risk. Yes, foreign exchange risk, that tough stuff that you saw in F9. We recap it and take it a step further. So we start looking in more detail at futures, options. We'll then apply forward futures options, swaps, which we'll go through and see, and we'll start looking then at how we manage your interest rate risk. Then you've got the last bit of the syllabus, part G, is going through there and looking at your emerging issues. So I'm sure you've all gone through and heard about the global economic crisis, the recession that the world has been through over the last 2 or 3 years, down there to the banking crisis that took place there in 2007, 8 and 9. We need to go through and look at, if you like, what caused it, but not really the direct cause, but the implication for you managing the business as a director. The fact that it's made it much more difficult to raise debt finance to finance your business. We'll also go through and have a look at some other emerging issues, so some dark pool trading. We'll also start looking as well at money laundering operations, or sort of say money laundering operations, maybe money laundering regulations and the impact that that has there on your business. But don't read into the syllabus in too much detail at this moment in time. We will talk about it in consummate detail as we go through. Just have a look at the brief overview that's there within the material. In terms of the exam, how it's going to be set, it's different for 2011 onwards from what you've seen previously. It's still the same 3 hours with your 15 minutes worth of reading time. So it's still going to be there, again, 100 marks in total. So you're still working there on 1.8 minutes per mark. What you have now, which is different from what we've seen before, is the way that the marks are split between the two sections. Section A is compulsory. You have to attempt both questions that are in there. It tends to be that each question focuses on one large topic, so it could be there, if you're thinking about the large topics that we have in the syllabus: advanced investment appraisal, business acquisitions and managing financial risk. And then at the end of each question there'll be, say, 5 marks or so, maybe up to 10 marks, that deal with some of the other issues. So maybe sustainability, maybe they're starting to think about ethics. It's going to total 50 to 70 marks, from what we've heard from the examiner, that could mean that you could have up to, say, 40-mark question in that section. In section B, that's just, if you like, the balance of the marks. Could be there, technically, anything between 30 and 50 marks. You're going to get 3 questions, of which you only need to answer 2. Okay. Of those questions that are set, one of them will be entirely discursive, no numbers whatsoever. So you need to be comfortable with the non-technical, the non-numerical aspect of the syllabus if you wish to attempt that question. I'd recommend that you do spend a bit of time thinking about answering that part. It can be quite, I wouldn't say easy, but easier than some of the other questions. If you think that 2 of the other 3 questions are going to really pick out some of the tricky technical parts of the syllabus, I think you're taking a big risk by putting all your eggs in the technical aspect of the syllabus. You only need to go through and get 1 question on that technical aspect that you find very difficult. Therefore, you're going to struggle to get that pass at 50%. I'd think, well, let's answer a technical aspect, let's answer a non-technical written aspect, and that will make it much, much easier for you within the exam. In terms of those questions that you get in section B, again, from what we've been told by the examiner, that can be anything from, say, 15 to 25 marks. Okay, and again, that will be there balanced up with whatever question marks you've had in section A. We'll talk more about exam technique when you get to revision, but for the time being, just remember that there will be a question that is purely written, which could be a bit easier than some of the technical aspects. So, on to the last little bit there of our introduction. How to go through there and pass this P4 exam. Something that a lot of people go through and say is impossible because it's one of the more difficult exams in the ACCA syllabus. One word. Nonsense. It isn't. It's highly passable, providing you put in the time and the effort. So, what have we got? Well, there we go. Those words cropping up once again. Make sure that you know your F9 knowledge well. Maybe we should have gone through and put in there the word very. You need to know your F9 knowledge very well. There is possibilities of scope to go through and pass the P4 exam just on your F9 knowledge alone, provided you know it very, very well. Second point in terms of passing the exam, do not learn everything. You look at the size of the P4 study manual, look at the size of the P4 revision book. There's a lot within there. Provided you go through and focus upon the key topics, which we will address as we go through the course, you'll give yourself a very, very good chance of passing this exam. Other bits that you need to go through and consider in terms of passing the exam. This is one of my real bugbears. Because it's a very numerical exam, apart from that 1 question in part B, where it's purely written, because it's numerical, a lot of people will go through there and think, yep, I know, I can get this 100% right. You might do if you had all the time in the world, and if you had your notes in front of you. 2 problems. 1, we've only got 3 hours plus 15 minutes reading time, and 2, we don't have the notes in front of us. So don't concentrate upon getting 100% right any question that you attempt. Remember that magical pass mark is there at 50%. If you get 50%, that's it. You don't need to come back and do the exam again. In terms of helping you through the exam, try and get the easier parts. So when you get to the revision phase, we'll start looking at what tend to be the easier parts of any exam style question. As I've said, the written aspects tend to be easier. So that's all about offering advice, offering recommendations. Remember, you're trying to become an accountant. You're going out there into the real world having to offer advice. You need to be able to demonstrate within the exam that you can offer that advice to the people out there who need it. Also I know we've said focus on the easier aspects, but do attempt some of the difficult aspects. Don't just ignore them completely. Don't do them first, because you'll get stuck on them and you'll eat away at your time. Have a go at them at the end of the question. Why? Because Even though you are not getting it 100% correct, you are attempting it, you are demonstrating good use of the techniques that you have available, so you will therefore go through and get some credit. If it's 1, 2 marks, that could make the difference between passing and failing the exam. You have to attempt everything on the paper. Focus on the easier bits first, get them done well, attempt some of the difficult aspects, and if you like, just grab some marks from wherever you possibly can. Other bits, people don't go through and tend to focus upon this from my experience of teaching the ACCA syllabus. People just go in there and just sit back, relax, and attempt the questions as and how they please. You've got 3 hours. You've got 100 marks. 3 hours is 180 minutes. 100 marks works out at 1.8 minutes per mark. So if you've got there a 20-mark question, which you're likely to have, 36 minutes upon it. No more, maybe a little bit less if it's a written style question, but 36 minutes is the maximum that you want to spend on it. Once you've done it, move on to the next question. Even in that 20-mark question, it will be split maybe into parts A, B and C. Allocate your mark to part A, B and C and put in the correct timing for each of those mark allocations. So if it was there 5 marks for part A, that's there 9 minutes. All makes sense. Last but by no means least, again, people will go through, learn the theory. So if we're thinking there about F9, looking at your gearing theories, Modigliani and Miller and the likes, people will just go through and regurgitate everything that they can remember from their notes. It's not a test of memory. If that was the case, it would be a nice, easy exam if we had a good memory. We need to go through there and make specific comments to the scenario. That involves reading the question and understanding the background. Use your 15 minutes of reading time well at the start, because that will go through and help you make those comments specific to the scenario. If you can do that, you put yourself on a very good footing to passing this paper.